to Jack, who's going to give you more technical in-depth information about how our product works with VMware vSphere 6, and if possible, a technical demonstration of the product and some benchmarking as well. Hey, Jack, I'm making you the presenter right now, so you can go ahead with your slides.
Okay. All right. So we'll. Oh, dang that one.
Yeah. So we can see the screen now, Jack.
Okay. Didn't realize we were going to do it offline. Okay. So basically, what we want to take a look at is using Vmware BDR with version 6 of vSphere. And the key becomes one of looking at a complex active VM, because that's where your mission critical application is going to be. It's probably and so there's going to be a need to meet aggressive recovery time objectives and recovery point objectives, which means you're going to need to take frequent incremental backups, probably measured in hours or even minutes, in order to get a good, tight integration of backup and replication operations. Now, in this presentation, we're just going to look at full and incremental backup. In another upcoming webinar, we'll take a look at the recovery part of this equation, because the real magic is back in the backup repository. But up front, there are a lot of advantages that can be gleaned with BDR. Let's see next. So for our test, what we did was set up a very high-speed iSCSI SAN. We used Dell PowerEdge R710 servers. On one, we placed both a Vmbu client and the Vmbu server for BDR. None of the clients, there was no client or server placed within the VMware environment, other than we added an extension to the VM tools, which enables the snapshot to take place on the SQL Server VM that we were targeting. So in this environment, we had a 10 gigabit iSCSI SAN and used a beta caching appliance to speed up the iSCSI throughput. This caching appliance is somewhat similar to the vSAN that VMware now has, in that it uses solid-state storage to provide the cache. With this, we were able to move into areas of about 100,000 IOPS on a VM with one host. So for our test, Again, we set up the Vembu server with the client. Now, Vembu, one of the key technologies is called UltraBlaze. Vembu will automatically discover the configuration. So in our case, we were sharing the iSCSI data stores that the VM saw and was using with the Windows server. So Vembu immediately recognized that we could do a backup without ever touching the LAN. So we stayed entirely within the iSCSI SAN during the backup, except for taking the snapshot. So here you see vCenter doing a full backup of our SQL Server VM. Now this VM had about 120 gigabytes of real data spread between a system disk and the database disk. And so you see the snapshots are taken. Nothing happens in terms of the vSphere environment. There's no data being written, nothing, no network traffic, until it finally releases the snapshots at the end of the backup, which took about 20 minutes for a full backup. During this time, our transfer rate was about 1.6 to 1.8 gigabits a second. In terms of the Windows server, that's about it was reading about 250 megabytes a second and writing about 100 megabytes a second to the to Vembu Hive. So our whole backup was compressed down to between 50 and 60 gigabytes for the initial first backup. Seem to be out of order there. The key, though, is to be taking incremental backups. And we scheduled incremental backups every 30 minutes. So within that 30-minute time frame, we were running the TPCE, a version of TPCE benchmark. During that period, we were running about 450 transactions a second, which in terms of activity on the SQL Server machine, we had maxed out CPU. Our VM had two 6-core CPUs assigned to it, had 48 gigs of memory. So in terms of I/O activity was being accelerated by our Cloudistics cache. So the entire activity at 500 transactions a second, the only thing we had saturated was I/O activity, was CPU. And we were still only at about a 5 millisecond response time on transactions. This, in terms of disk I/O, was pretty intense. What we were running was about 1,200 IOPS a second in terms of disk reads and writes, since they expand much more than the SQL transactions, which are more complex, but are doing a lot of small reads and writes in between doing its completing a transaction. So for a snapshot, this is pretty intense activity. And many of you will, if you're doing an active incremental backup of a VM that's doing a lot of I/O, will note that you usually get the backup done in a few seconds to a minute or so, and then you wait for all of the snapshots to close. Well, that doesn't happen here because as we see, we're completing snapshots on a SQL Server system that was running 450 transactions a second, 1,200 IOPS a second is in terms of its disk activity, and we were doing it in 4 minutes. So every 30 minutes, we were changing about 10% of the data. So assuming that this is a mission-critical application and there is a need not to lose a lot of data, 10% is a significant factor. So every 30 minutes, we did our backup. Backup itself took 4 minutes. And in that time, it grabbed about 20 gigabytes of data. And Vembu, by the time we had finished about 10 incremental backups along with our initial full backup, we had still used under 100 gigabytes of data on Vembu Hive. Even though this was representing close to a terabyte. In terms of what could be restored, since we had essentially each backup, even though with the incrementals, is represented as a full backup, and using pointers internally with Vembu Hive, we had used actually only about 100 gigabytes of data from the repository, which in terms of global size for the repository was 500 gigabytes. Not terribly large, yet we were still able to very easily handle all of the backups from our SQL Server test. So what we've got in terms of performance is very significant because V6 with vSAN and third-party accelerators like the Cloudistics iSCSI accelerator are beginning to provide extreme I/O capabilities. And the problem with extreme I/O capabilities is if you're trying to back up that while it's in action, you need a very sophisticated snapshot capability. Vembu does that by not doing what Vmware does in terms of snapshots. Vmware of the whole machine takes a copy on write snapshot. Most companies internally within Windows, when it goes to create something like SQL Server or Exchange, will repeat that structure of snapshot using copy on write. BDR uses replicate on write, which is the technique used by NetApp. Now, using that, as long as you don't create a huge chain of snapshots within the VM itself, and nobody's going to be doing that, you can back out of them very rapidly. And so with our VM banging away at the disk at 1,200 IOPS, we took snapshots, did a backup, all in 4 minutes. And that gives us the first look at what goes on with V6. And in the future, we'll be taking a look at the ability, especially since we had created this on a Windows server that had Hyper-V, of using, of allowing Vembu Hive to instantly run up a copy of our, after each backup, we can run up a copy of the VM as a Hyper-V VM, take a snapshot of it, and then email that to the operator to show that, yes, indeed, the backup was successful. And not only was it successful in terms of being completed, you can launch the VM, and the VM will launch properly. So that ends what we want to talk about today in terms of backup with V6.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Jack. Thank you for that information on vSphere 6. And at this time, I'd like to go back and give you a small demonstration of Vmware BDR version 3.0 itself. So let me go ahead and start sharing my screen, and I can show you the demonstration of the product itself. Just give me a second. Just going to make myself the presenter here. Okay, great. So I believe you can all see the screen that I'm sharing with you. So one thing, like Jack mentioned, one thing that separates us apart is the way we perform the snapshot. Okay, that's where the difference is all about. So you could technically do a snapshot in two ways. One is the way every other company does in the market, which is a copy on write snapshot. So the problem is when you have applications running inside a VM, let's say an Exchange or an SQL, performing a lot of transactions, and when you go and try to take a backup of that particular VM, you can see that it's affecting the production quality of that particular VM. It's like either the Exchange is stopping or the SQL is not performing its transactions. So it's causing a lot of problem there. So what we have done is we have implemented a new snapshotting technology called rewrite on copy, which is it doesn't keep the snapshot open. Rather, it just closes the snapshot, and then after the backup is complete, we go back and purge all the transaction logs. So it's really lightweight when the backup is happening on the VM, and it doesn't affect the applications running inside the VM. So that way you can get a good copy of a crash consistent as well as an application consistent copy of all those images, and then you can go back and perform granular restores, like you can do a file level recovery, or you could do a granular mailbox level recovery or a mail level recovery, right? So with that being said, I'd like to show a live demonstration of the product here itself. I have a BDR client agent. So like I mentioned, this client agent is what gets installed on either a desktop or a laptop or any system that you need to back up. If it is a VMware environment, this client agent has to be installed on one of the VMs, not on all the VMs. And once you install it on the VM, you can go to virtualization backups, and then you can go to VMware backup. Again, this is a web-based user interface that you can access it either within the VM or outside of the VM. And then once you go to virtualization backup, you can add your VMware servers that you need to backup. You can provide either the vSphere IP and password or the vCenter IP and password. And then the system is going to go add that VM. And once it is added, you can go back to the Add VMware Backup page and go back and configure that particular VM for a backup operation. And then the system is going to list out all the VMs running on that particular host. And then you can select the VMs that you'd like to back up. And then you can configure the scheduling, like in terms of how frequently you want the backups to run. And then you can go back and configure the retention, like you can specify how many restore points you want to keep for the current day and how many daily restore points you want. You can go back and keep up to 90 days worth of restore points. If you want to configure additional full backups, let's say you want to retain monthly copies of the data, You can go back and configure additional full backups for monthly basis. So you can go back and say, I want a copy of the data for every month. Once, so you can go back and configure additional full backups, depending on how many months of data you want to retain. And then review the configuration, give a backup job name, and then you can run the backups. And these backups, typically when it's running on a local network, will be very fast. On an average, you get about, on a gigabit switch, you get about 900 Mbps of throughput. So if you'd like to go back and throttle the bandwidth, we have bandwidth throttling settings where you could go back and say, I want the backup bandwidth to be set to a certain specific limit, where you can say enable bandwidth throttling from this time to this time, from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., set only 200 Mbps in terms of bandwidth. And then you could also say disable bandwidth throttling during the weekend, right? And then you can go ahead and save this configuration. So that way, your backups will obey the bandwidth that you have set up in the product. You could also perform a similar way. You could also do the Hyper-V backup. So the only difference here with Hyper-V backup is that you have to install the client agent on the Hyper-V host. And once you install the agent on the host, the system is going to detect all the VMs running on Hyper-V host, and then it's going to give you the options. It's going to show you all the VMs, and then you can securely back it up to the backup server, right? And then everything else is the same, like the scheduling options, the retention option, and reviewing the configuration, and then saving it. It's all the same options after that. You can also do a physical machine disk image backup, where when you install this client agent on a physical machine, like a server, a desktop, or a laptop, you will have the option to image the hard drives. So you can back up both the Windows partition as well as the boot partition. So that way, you can bring up this physical machine as a VM on the backup server in the event of disaster. And finally, you can do like a traditional file backup, where you can back up all the files and folders. So if you're in a system, you want to back up certain specific folders or certain specific files, you can use the file backup option to go back up that specific files and folders. And you can perform granular recovery. You can just restore a specific file or a folder from your backup job. You also have the option to perform VMware replication, where this is a live VM replication from one ESXi host to another ESXi host for performing instant failover or instant disaster recovery. So you could specify a primary server from which you want to replicate all the VMs to another secondary server, either on-site or off-site location, for instant failover purposes. So you can say, I want to replicate these two VMs to another VMware ESXi server located in some of the different locations. So you can specify the DR server's IP address, the data center name, the data store name, a replica suffix name, so you can know that these VMs will have a different name rather than the original VM name. And you can also set up the retention count, and then you can review the configuration and then save it. So that way, apart from backup, you can also have a live replica copies of VMs that you can instantly turn on in the event of disaster. So these are all some of the settings on the client agent. So let me now go back to the backup server and show you some of the restore options. So this backup server, like I mentioned, is either installed on a physical machine running Windows 2012 R2 or 2008 R2, or running Ubuntu 14.04 or 12.04. The choice of these operating systems is because these OSs come with inbuilt hypervisor, like it comes with Hyper-V. So we can integrate into this Hyper-V for performing instant disaster recovery. Like you can boot up these VMware or physical machines as a VMs on the backup server. Or with Ubuntu, it comes with KVM. So basically you can instant boot a VM as a image on KVM for instant disaster recovery purposes. So in this backup server, I have three backup jobs that I've performed. One is a Hyper-V backup, a VMware backup, and also a physical machine backup. And I'm going to show you how the restore options look like. So this VMware backup job is actually a 600 gigabyte total VM job. After deduplication and compression, it comes down to 184 gigabyte. So when I go to restore options, I get multiple restore options that I can perform on this particular backup job. So I can restore this VM back to the ESXi server from either to a remote server or to the same server from which the backup has been initiated. I can specifically choose which VMs I want to restore. So I can go to a point in time timestamp, and then I can go to a specific VM that I want to restore, and then provide the ESXi credentials to the ESXi or vCenter. I can provide the data store name, the new target VM name, the vCenter password, the username, the target data center name. And after I review the configurations and proceed with it, the system will now continue to restore all those VMs back to the ESXi server. So that way I can perform a live VM restore onto an ESXi. So this is your primary restore options, specifically if you're backing up a VMware environment with Vmware BDR. The next and most widely used option is the option to perform instant boot. So what this instant boot does is it takes this VM and instantly boots it, this VMware, and instantly boots it to the hypervisor that comes with the backup server. So I can take this VMware environment and boot it up in Hyper-V. So I can go and choose a specific point in time timestamp, and then I select the VM that I want instant boot. Let's say it's a Windows XP client. And then I can choose the hypervisor here. In this case, it's Hyper-V. Allocate some memory to it. Just give 1 GB memory. I don't have enough memory on the system. Or I have some VMs up and running. And then once I instant boot it, if I go to the Hyper-V manager, let me go to the Hyper-V manager here. The system will now give me the option to actually go back and perform an instant boot in Hyper-V. So that way I can instantly bring this VM up and running on Hyper-V, so I can have instant access to the data, right? And this VM that I'm bringing up in Hyper-V is persistent, which means whatever changes that I make on this VM after I bring this VM up and running is also saved. So that way I can turn it off, turn it on, and I can use this VM to perform a fail back to my original environment. So if not of Hyper-V, if I don't want to instant boot, let's say I just want to simply mount it and view the files and folders, I can perform what is called as an instant mount. So when I perform instant mount, I basically mount this backup job as a drive, as a virtual drive on my Explorer window on the backup server. So that way I can mount this backup job and I can view all the files and folders from that particular environment. Again, I choose a specific point in time timestamp. And then I choose the VM that I want to mount. And then I review the configurations, and then I say VHT mount right now. And once I say attach, if I go to my Explorer window, I can see that 2 new disks will be created right now. So the G drive that just now got created, and then I can simply go through the drive and I can see all the files and folders, and I can simply browse through all the files and folders and perform granular recovery. I can even search for a specific file from this particular drive that I just brought up and running. And once I got my file back, I can simply go back and unmount that particular backup job that I just did right now. So depending on what I want to restore, if I want to bring the entire VM up and running, or simply I want to perform a granular restore, I can do that with the help of this restore operation. So once I'm done with my restore operations, I simply go back and unmount that particular backup job. So I can go back and I can say virtual unmount. Right, the system will now go back and it will help me unmount the data. And also, I could also perform a restore operation, similar type of restore operation in a physical server. Even a physical server, I can restore it back to an ESXi. I can perform an instant boot. I can attach this drive so that I can do file and folder level recovery. And I can download this image files in any format of my choice. So basically, I can get these files, like I can plug in a USB drive to the backup server, and I can do a point-in-time recovery of these images in any virtual format. Like for example, I can just do test one, and then I can select the format of my choice. I can download it as a VHD file, a VMDK, a VHDX, a VMDK flat, or a RAW format. I simply plug in a USB drive, and then I download this image file in any format of my choice. Or even better is I go to the Explorer window, I see a BDR virtual drive here. So I go here and go to the BDR virtual drive, and I can see all my backup jobs in different file formats like IMG, VHD, or VHDX, or any format. So let's say I'm backing up a physical machine. So let's say Microsoft is ending the support for Windows 2003 by July 14th. So I want to virtualize this Windows 2003, and I want to keep a copy of that somewhere, so that way I don't want to lose the data. So what I can do is I can come here, uh, image this 2003 physical server, and then go to this VMDK file format, and then I can just simply copy this VMDK file as of this particular point in time. I just copy this file, store it in a USB, and then keep it in a secure location. So that way, I know that I can access this particular machine whenever I want to, or whenever I need to. I can simply load this VMDK file and access the system immediately. There are more restore options as well. We have a concept called virtual drive management, where we expose the VHD and VMDK files of all the backup jobs as an NFS share. So basically, if I enable this NFS share, you can access this NFS share using the IP address of the backup server /NFS. So all the backup jobs that I did right now will be exposed as a VHD and VMDK file that I can mount it from here and exposed as an NFS. And using that, I can go to an ESXi or go to a Hyper-V server and perform a network boot, or I can import these VMs into this hypervisor and perform a network boot based off of NFS. So that way, I can also perform instant recovery on different hypervisors, different remote hypervisors of my choice. We also have this cloud DR management, where we have the ability to have all these VMs replicated to our servers running on Amazon. So in the event of disaster, if you have lost all the data, we will give you the option to bring these VMs up and running on the cloud. You can enable it or disable it, depending on if you want it or not. You can choose where you want the data to go to, like East Coast or West Coast, or Europe or Asia Pacific. You can specify what time window in which this replication should happen. Do you want to seed the initial data? If the initial data is huge, we provide you seeding options. We provide you bandwidth throttling options, etc. But this is your failover option, the final resort. In the event if the entire VM goes down, we will give you a console where you can log in and bring these VMs up and running on the cloud. That way you can securely connect to it using a VPN and start accessing these machines, or even download the data from the cloud in the event of disaster. Apart from that, we have a wide variety of reports that's going to help you stay on track of these backup operations. So we have a backup status reports. So in the event of disaster, we could email you, or if a backup is successful or if it's failed or missed, you can have these reports emailed out to you. You can create new filters where you can specifically target and say, I want to be alerted for missed backups, or I want to be alerted for failed backups, etc. And we also have historical report where you can see how your backups are performing over a period of time, like an historical trend for the last 3 months. If you want to get a report on how your backups have been performing for a specific client, for a specific backup job, you can get all these reports from here, like an historical trend of how the backups have been performing over a period of, let's say, 3 months or 4 months. So you can see a success message, which means all the backup jobs over the period of 1 month is successful. Finally, we also have an important report called backup verification report. This is very important because what we have seen so far is only about the backups itself, but we haven't seen about restores. Backup is always all about restores. So if a restore is not happening properly, then that defies the whole purpose of taking a backup in the first place. Because many a times, as you might have seen, being in the backup industry, you might have a good copy of backups, but after, let's say, a month or so, if you went to restore, you might see that the data is corrupted, right? There is no other way to tell if a data is corrupted or not until you actually perform a restore and test it out. So you have to perform a disaster recovery testing. But that is a very tedious operation, specifically if you want to perform it over a period of over large number of systems. So what we have done is an automated way where we could restore this VM or restore this backup ourselves at the end of every day we perform like a corruption check, we perform like an integrity check, and we also get this VM up and running. Like we boot it up, get the VM up and running, and then take a screenshot, right, to let you know if the backup is successful or failed. If it's failed, you're going to see an error message like this. It says boot failure, but your backup job will say it's successful. But when you try to boot it, you might find the data is corrupted. So that way you can go back and maybe reconfigure the backup job so that you get a success message after that. So instead of actually waiting for the disaster to happen, you now have a proactive way to understand, to know if a backup job is failing or if it's successful. So that way you can stay on top of these backup operations. And these reports can also be emailed out to you. So that way you can have these email reports coming in on a daily basis. So as long as you see the screenshot that you're seeing right now, like you see the boot screen, which means that the VM is actually booting, it's not corrupt, and you can actually use this to restore the data in the event of a disaster. So these reports are something that's going to help you stay on track with respect to your backup operations. And finally, we have a wide variety of tools that's going to help you with your restore functionalities. So let me go over that very quickly. So like I mentioned, you can get a 30-day free trial of the product, and it is absolutely free if you want to back up physical environments. We only charge you for virtual environment backups. So you can go to the vmware.com/try page to download the software and start installing it and start trying it out. We also have pre-configured virtual appliances for VMware, Hyper-V, Zen, and VirtualBox that you can instantly download and deploy to get your backup server up and running quickly and start testing out the products. We also have recovery tools, like we have an Explorer for SQL, for Exchange, for SharePoint, a Universal Explorer for file level recovery or application level recovery. So that way you can perform granular mailbox level recovery or a database level recovery or a table level recovery of applications. And you can perform unlimited application level restore for free. We also have a recovery CD for 32-bit and 64-bit environment. So that way you can have a VM or a physical machine's image loaded onto a completely new hardware. Like you can get a new hardware, you can do a dissimilar hardware boot, and you can get the VM up and running on a new hardware where we perform driver injection and make the best effort to get the VM up and running on the new hardware. So you can download all these tools for free from our website and start using the product. With that being said, then that brings us to the end of this webinar and technical demo. And I'd like to take some questions on and start answering those questions as and when they come through. And I can see most of your questions should have been answered already on the chat window itself. But let me also, I'll take some questions on and start answering it. So there are a few questions that says, can I host it in our own data center instead of Amazon Cloud? You could actually have the BDR backup server hosted on-premise, that is at the customer location. If you don't want to have the data in the offsite sent to Amazon's cloud, you can deploy a BDR backup server in your data center, in your own location, and have the backup server backed up to that other backup server in your offsite location. So that way, you don't have to have the data sent to our cloud necessarily. It's only an option, but if you want to be sent it to your cloud alone, you can do it as well. It's available right now. So if you want to do it, if you want to download it, the BDR backup server, install one in your local office and install one in your remote office and start backing it up, you can do it right now. It's available, it's on the website. If you need more details or help with it, you can contact our support team and we'd be happy to help you with it. So the other question is, why are you offering free for physical servers? So the answer to that is, like, if you look into the industry, the IT consumption, it's hugely diversified, and we can see more and more virtualization adoption happening. On an average, we can see about 75 to 80% of environments are already being virtualized. And physical environments are only being a complement that we would like to commoditize in the industry, because we know that they're slowly fading away. Maybe the use of physical servers would be limited to maybe 10% or 5% for the next 3 to 4 years. So since we wanted to focus more on virtualization and focus more on VMware and Hyper-V backups, or also the virtualization technologies, we wanted to give users a way to test our products, and we wanted to give this physical server environment free of cost. So that way, users can go and test the product on physical servers, and if they're happy with what they see, they could use our products for backing up virtual environments as well. So hopefully that answers that question. So does it retain user and group permissions? Yes, it does retains the users and group permissions. We actually use Microsoft Volume Shadow Copy Snapshot, and we also specifically make sure that all the permissions at user levels and group levels are also maintained. And when you perform a restore, you will have a restore operation performed with all the user permissions and group permissions restored as well. There's other question that comes up from Chris. It says, can you back up to local server and the cloud server both with the same backup job? Actually, no, it has to be backed up to the local server first. And from the local server, you can have the data sent to our cloud servers from the local backup server. It's not like both the backup jobs are happening with one single backup operation. The next question is, I need to test all of your products on some physical and some VM. Who will help install and implement the product? You can always contact our support team. Our support teams are available at vmware.support@vmware.com, or the phone number is on our website. Our support is 24/7. It's free of cost, and we can be of any assistance to you in case you need any help with installation or troubleshooting. We'd be very happy to help you with installation process. And can you send out a link to the recording of this webinar? Definitely. This webinar is recorded, and we will have this recording sent out to you as an email after this webinar is done, so that you have a recorded copy that you can listen to after this webinar is done. All right, great. So we still have 5 more minutes, and I can see more questions coming up. For those for whom we haven't answered the question, we will make sure that we will send you an email after this webinar as a follow-up, so that way you can we'll make sure that all your questions are answered. And I just have to take one more question here. This it says, how long will you keep supporting StoreGrid version 4.2 and 4.4? So we have made a decision to keep supporting StoreGrid indefinitely for people who would like to have a file-based backup solution that they can deploy it and offer it as a service to their customers who can use StoreGrid product. We will keep supporting the product until further notice. So you can have the support on for the next, definitely for the next 5 years or so. And if you need more details, we'll be happy to help you with it. You can send an email to vmware.support@vmware.com, and we'd be happy to answer any questions regarding StoreGrid version 4.2. And how do you get the free hardware? I don't really get the question. No, we don't give a free hardware. We only provide free virtual appliance. So it's a virtual VMDK appliance that you can download it and install it on your environment, but not necessarily a free hardware. So the other question is, can you still buy 4.4 licenses? Yeah, definitely you can still buy 4.4 licenses. You can still get those MCALs and you can still use it. That's absolutely fine, and like I mentioned, we'll still be supporting it, and we'll make sure that all your questions with respect to StoreGrid are all promptly answered. Like, we have a separate support department that takes care of all StoreGrid related questions. Great. So hopefully that answered most of the questions. For those whom we couldn't answer those questions on this webinar right now, I'll make sure we'll go back and answer those questions after this webinar in a follow-up email, right? And I'd like to thank everyone for your time today, for patiently listening to this webinar, and sorry for any noises that came in the middle of the webinar, but we'll make sure that if you do have any additional questions, please feel free to send us an email to vmware.support@vmware.com, and we'd be happy to answer any questions you might have. So thank you everyone for once again for your time, and I look forward to talking to you again. You all have a great day.